High quality serving from both, very dominant in the service games. I thought he played.
The stadium fell silent. One moment Jannik Sinner was sprinting across the baseline. The next, his legs gave in, his racket slipped, and his body folded under the Shanghai heat. Across the net, Tallon Griekspoor stood frozen. No celebration, no fist pump. Just a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He had won, but not in the way any athlete wants to. You could almost hear the collective breath of the crowd being held. 2 hours and 36 minutes of relentless hitting, running, sweating, and then suddenly the human body had had enough. In that instant, victory tasted like ash. It wasn't glory, it was empathy. Griekspoor walked slowly to the net, his shirt drenched, his heartbeat still racing. He looked at Sinner and the young Italian star who had beaten him every single time before, and whispered words that barely made it through the noise of the stadium. "I wish him a speedy recovery." He meant it. You could see it, because deep down, every player knows it could have been them. Under the floodlights of Shanghai, where the humidity hangs heavy like a curse, no one is invincible. Later in the post-match interview, Griekspoor's words carried the weight of something more profound than a simple win. "This is definitely not the way you want to win," he said quietly. No bravado, no swagger, just a man who'd seen how fragile greatness can be. The match was supposed to be about skill. Forehands, serves, strategy. Instead, it became about endurance, compassion, and the thin line separating triumph from tragedy. And maybe that's why the image of Sinner walking off, towel over his head, will stay longer in our minds than the scoreline itself, because it reminded us that even in the fiercest competition, humanity still matters. But what few people knew that night, as cameras panned away and the crowd dispersed, was that this moment of bittersweet victory marked a turning point for Griekspoor himself. Behind that calm, polite exterior was a man who had been through a storm far darker than any Shanghai night. And to understand that storm, and the months of losing, the mental collapse, and the journey back to belief, we need to rewind the clock. Before the bright lights of Shanghai, before the polite applause and the interviews, Tallon Griekspoor was quietly drowning. For 2.5 months, he hadn't won a single match. Every flight felt heavier, every practice session colder. The courts in America blurred together. Washington, Cincinnati, New York. Places where he arrived full of hope and left with nothing but silence in his hotel room. It wasn't just the defeats. It was the way they ate away at him point by point. You start by blaming bad luck, then the conditions, then your opponent. But eventually you turn the mirror toward yourself, and that's where the darkness truly begins. He'd wake up knowing exactly how the day would end. With another handshake across the net, another loss, another nod of disappointment from his coach. For professional athletes, losing isn't just about points or ranking. It's about identity. Who are you when winning disappears? Those who followed Griekspoor's journey saw the numbers, not the man. They didn't see him sitting in a quiet locker room staring at his racket as if it had betrayed him. They didn't hear the phone calls to his family, the quiet voice saying, "I'm fine, I'll figure it out." Because that's what athletes do. They hide the cracks, they pretend they're unbreakable. But in truth, he was breaking. The joy of the game had faded. Matches became obligations. Confidence, that fragile thread that separates winners from wanderers, had snapped. And yet somewhere deep inside, a tiny ember of belief refused to die. When the tour moved to Asia, something shifted. He didn't win in Chengdu. He didn't win in Beijing. But for the first time in months, his shots began to land. His timing returned. His body moved with purpose again. He could feel it, the rhythm, the pulse, the spark. Sometimes, he later said, you can lose 10 matches in a row and still feel you're getting closer. That's the paradox of sport. Progress often hides inside defeat. By the time he landed in Shanghai, Griekspoor wasn't chasing perfection anymore. He was chasing peace. He just wanted one good match, one moment to breathe again, to believe again. And fate, as cruel and poetic as it can be, gave him exactly that. Only it wouldn't come easy. His next opponent was Jannik Sinner, the young Italian who had beaten him every single time they'd met before, and the night ahead would push both men to their absolute limits. It was 8:30 p.m. in Shanghai, but the air still felt like it was boiling. The humidity wrapped around the players like a wet blanket. Even under the floodlights, you could see the haze shimmer above the court. For Tallon Griekspoor, every breath felt like inhaling steam. Across the net, Jannik Sinner stood calm, expressionless, the kind of calm that only comes from confidence born of beating your opponent every time before. The first set was brutal. Both men served like cannons, refusing to blink. Each rally was a test of nerves. 10 shots, 12 shots, 15 shots, until finally Sinner edged ahead in a tie break that looked effortless. He hit lines that barely existed, served aces that blurred past like lightning. Griekspoor could only nod. He knew that look, the look of a man in complete control. But tennis has a strange way of humbling even the best. Yes, in the second set, the rhythm shifted. At 4-3, Griekspoor faced a breakpoint that could have ended the match. He tossed the ball, sweat dripping from his wristband, the sound of his own heartbeat louder than the crowd. He hit a first serve wide. Fault. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and went again. The second serve clipped the line. Sinner attacked, hard, flat, to the backhand corner. Griekspoor slid, stretched, and somehow guided the ball back. It kissed the net cord and dropped in. The crowd gasped. Luck? Maybe. But sometimes luck is just the reward for refusing to give up. That single point changed everything. From that moment, Griekspoor began to believe again. His legs moved faster, his shots grew heavier. He broke Sinner's rhythm, dragged him into longer rallies, tested his patience. It wasn't beautiful tennis. It was survival. And as the match reached the third set, both men looked spent. Their shirts clung to their bodies, their shoes squeaked on the slick court, and every point was agony, every step a gamble. But the will to win, that invisible force that separates champions from ghosts, had kept them moving. Then, somewhere deep into the third set, the unthinkable happened. Sinner, pale and trembling, began to falter. His movement slowed. His serve dropped in speed. Griekspoor noticed, but there was no satisfaction in it. He had seen this before, when the body quits before the mind does. Moments later, Sinner walked to his chair and shook his head. He couldn't go on. The crowd applauded, out of respect, not celebration. Griekspoor walked forward, shook his hand, and said softly, "Not the way you want to win." It was the truest thing said all night. Victory in that moment felt smaller than compassion. But as the lights dimmed and cameras turned away, one truth remained. For the first time in months, Griekspoor had survived the storm and rediscovered himself. When the final handshake ended, and the crowd began to drift out of the stands, Tallon Griekspoor sat alone for a moment on his bench. He didn't look like a man who had just reached the last 16 of a Masters tournament. He looked like someone trying to understand what had just happened. The scoreboard said victory, but inside it didn't feel like one. Under the cool Shanghai night, the echoes of the match still hung in the air. The sound of rackets cracking, sneakers sliding, and one final sigh from a body that could no longer continue. He thought of Jannik Sinner, of the respect between players who've shared the same struggle. Endless training, pain, travel, pressure. He thought of how easily roles could reverse. How one day you're the victor, and the next, the one limping off court. To the outside world, it was another match result. To him, it was a reminder that sport isn't just about winning. It's about endurance, humility, and grace. Because every athlete eventually learns that victory without empathy is hollow. Reporters later asked him if the win restored his confidence. He smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "but not because of the score, because I played with heart again." And that's the heart of this story. It's not about trophies or rankings. It's about rediscovering the part of yourself that refuses to give up, even when the world stops watching. For British fans watching from afar, it's a familiar lesson. We've seen it across generations, from Andy Murray fighting on one hip to Emma Raducanu who's smiling through exhaustion. True greatness isn't in the highlight reels. It's in the quiet moments after the noise fades, when an athlete sits alone, drenched in sweat, wondering what it all means. Tallon Griekspoor's words. Not the way you want to win. Linger not as regret, but as wisdom. Because sometimes victory isn't about lifting a trophy. It's about walking off the court knowing you didn't lose yourself in the process. As the lights dim over Shanghai and the cameras cut away, his story becomes something larger, a mirror to every athlete, every dreamer, every person who's ever stumbled but kept walking. And maybe that's what sport is truly about. Not just winning, but becoming. So let me ask you this. What does winning mean to you? Is it the score, the applause, the trophy? Or is it the quiet dignity of fighting, falling, and standing up again? If this story moved you, if it made you see sport through a deeper lens, then give it a like, share it with someone who needs a reminder of resilience, and subscribe for more stories that show the heart behind the headlines. Because here on this channel, we don't just talk about matches, we talk about what it means to be human.